podcast for people who know what they don't want out of their life and career, but aren't sure what they'd rather be doing.
In a world where it's easy to exist, but hard to feel alive, we, Kristen
And Rachel,
2 certified life and career coaches, are here to help you cut through the information overload, get unstuck, and focus not just on how you can have a career you're passionate about, but how to create a whole life that feels fulfilling.
so join us here, where we serve up inspiration and down-to-earth wisdom in a way that only 2 best friends can.
We want you to experience the relief of knowing that, yes, you're allowed to want more out of your life and career.
And no, you don't have to wander through the dark anymore. Our job is to light the fire that shows you the way. Let's go.
I didn't bring my sound effects today.
Your sound effects?
Yeah, the last time we did a Magic 8 Ball, I did a lot of sloshing around.
Oh, I was thinking about your sound effects for the tarot deck when you're like shuffling, quote unquote, the deck.
No,
but
I'm talking about the water in a
bring your
jar
little
that I
water
got.
container. I think that's okay. You can imagine us shaking up a Magic 8 Ball for you.
Sorry, I yawned because it's late and I'm tired. It's actually not late. It's like 7 o'clock
We
at night,
also
but I'm
already
tired.
recorded this and it didn't work. So here we are again. Gotta love technology.
Okay, so you're just going to keep hearing this and I'm not going to apologize for it because it's informative and you need to know that we're going to be doing our pandemic style offerings. No, that's not a cool.
We're not really post-pandemic.
No,
We're still in it.
lived experience pandemic offerings. So again, I'm not going to dive deep into this, but just reminding you that until June, we're going to be doing 50% off of the Passion Profile short course. So like $125 instead of its normal $250-ish. And it's a great place to start if you're new to Clarity on Fire and you want to get clear and work on your career direction, but you just need a little bit of DIY. It's a great place to just spend a day doing that. And really, you could just take you a day. And then we're doing single sessions too, which we don't normally do. We haven't done in 5 years, single coaching sessions.
And we've never done them at this price, I don't think.
No, probably
because we're
not.
trying to make
Don't
this
remember.
accessible right now. So we're trying to make, if you need a little bit of direction or a little bit of support in this time, or maybe just something unrelated, but you want to take advantage of this very limited deal, single sessions are $150.
And just so you know, that's the short course is as many people can do that as they want to. With coaching, with, single sessions, it's a little bit different because it depends on our availability. And right now our calendars are kind of getting busy. So,
And we are getting some of those single sessions coming in too. So
right.
we're filling up a little.
Yeah. So at this point, I'm not going to we'll let you know if we're going to change it and take it down because we just get too busy or inundated. But just know that it might be a few weeks before we actually can have a session. But again, we'll give you warning if we're going to nix it because it got out of hand.
Did we talk about the fact that you can get both together?
You can bundle them.
Bundle them and actually save an additional $50.
Yeah.
So the bundle is $225 for the short course and a single coaching session, which is less than the short course is usually.
Yeah, it's a good deal. Meant to be just
extra support right now.
Yeah, I mean, to make it easier to get a little help if that's what you want or need. So, okay, Magic 8 Ball. This is one of my very favorite episodes we've ever done. It's in my top 10.
It's also
Easy.
Incredibly relevant,
yeah,
even though we
relevant.
did it, 2 years ago?
Like a year and a half ago.
Yeah, back in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
So it's probably more relevant now on a universal scale than it
Yes.
was then.
When we talked about it, it was me feeling it on a personal scale, and now it's relevant to everybody, I think. So it's about transitions, and it's about grief and the relationship between those things. And I just want to remind you that even if you're not feeling even if you don't think you're feeling traditionally grieved, transitions often bring up grief and you don't even realize that's what it is sometimes. And sometimes we also feel grief over transitions that are supposed to be quote unquote happy. And then we're confused. Like, why do I feel sad? I wanted this to end. There's a lot of complicated, nuanced emotions that come up when you're experiencing a transition. And I feel like we need to talk about it. And we already did. So we're going to just let you hear this. It's really, really good.
It's a really good one. And we hope you guys will come and share how that might be helpful to you and what transitions you might be going through right now, whether planned or unplanned.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So we're going to drop you in at some point in the old episode, and then we'll pop you back out and we'll be back again in 2020 timeline to talk to you at the end. Transitioning into our topic.
Huh.
I know I'm being really corny because we're talking about transitions. So what do we mean when we say a transition? First of all, I think we mean more than you think we mean. I think a lot of the time people think of transitions understandably as graduating from college,
Getting married.
having a baby. Those are transitions.
Moving.
Having someone die on you, right? Like losing someone. That sounded kind of... Having someone just croak on you, which, that can happen. And it's a huge transition.
Yes.
Transitions can be negative, or they can feel negative, or they can be incredibly positive. They can also be more like milestones rather than transitions. So the traditional way I think of a transition is like an event. Like graduating from college is an event, and it really marks the end of one phase very clearly and the beginning of a new phase. There are certain things, milestones like promotions, that might be a transition, even though it might not feel like a monumental event. Having a birthday really doesn't matter what birthday you're having, but if you have some sort of emotional baggage tied to that age for whatever reason, this is the age I thought I would be when I would have kids and I don't. Or this is the age my mom was when she got married and I'm not. Those types of things. Then they can feel like transitions.
Absolutely.
Too.
It's true. A transition at its core is something ending and something new beginning. And sometimes that's very obvious on the outside of your life, like the events we just described. But sometimes it's an internal ending of a phase emotionally, or your 20s, or some
a health
period
thing,
of time. Right. It could be I had a year-long health crisis and now I'm transitioning into being well again, or vice versa. And it might not be so visible to the outside world, but it's still at its core the end of something and then the beginning of something else.
So the reason I wanted to talk about this was because I am feeling a lot of transitional energy around leaving my 20s and being in my 30s. More than I thought I would. And it's the first time I've turned any age and not been sure how I feel about it. I just think it's not a big deal to turn 29 or 28. And who cares about turning 22, right? Like, you're young. And you don't know what you're doing.
Although you're allowed to feel a transition around any
Sure,
age.
but personally, I was just like, who there's not much of a difference between 21 and 22.
Right.
But there felt like a really big difference between 29 and 30. And so I've been thinking a lot about this. And it's been coming up a lot in conversations I've been having with clients. None around age,
same.
around totally different subjects.
All kinds of life situations.
But here's what I'm learning that I find very interesting about transitions. And it's always been true, but I'm just seeing it now, which is why I wanted to sit down and have a side chat about it. Transitions always come with grief. It doesn't even matter if you're happy about the transition. Or even if you don't know how you feel about the transition. The transition doesn't even have to be sad in and of itself. It doesn't have to mean someone died. That makes sense. When someone dies, You experience grief. That makes sense. It doesn't necessarily make sense that you are really grieved because you're just having a birthday, or that you had a baby and you should, quote unquote, be really happy. But instead, you're crying your eyes out and you're grieving and you don't even know why you're upset.
Yeah. I actually wrote a blog a couple of years ago about my transition out of my last full-time job. And by the way, I hated that job. If you haven't heard me talk about it before, I couldn't stand that job. And yet on the last day when I was packing up the stuff on my desk and saying goodbye to everyone, I felt these weird pangs of grief, even though I'd been looking forward to that day for months and months.
Yeah.
And there's something about an ending, even if it's something you wanted to end really badly, that still is going to bring up some grief, some sadness.
You know, I actually think that it's even less contextual and hard to explain than that. Because I don't necessarily know if I guess it's the ending that's bringing it up, but I think that this gets to what the point of grief is in the first place. Okay? I don't think grief is necessarily I don't think it's necessarily about sadness I mean, I actually think that grief is just a cleansing agent.
Yeah.
I think that grief, you know, when you get something in your eye and then your eyes start producing tears and you have to like sort of like cry to flush your eyes out. I think grief is the tears for your soul.
Yeah.
I think it flushes your soul out. And it is like a wave or a river, and it just washes through you. And it is meant to clear out the junk and the cobwebs and literally bring up all of the stuff that you don't need anymore and that you might need to process in order for you to move on to another phase of your life.
Right. It prepares you for what's coming next, because if a transition is an ending, it's also a beginning. And
Right.
you're going to have to be in a different state to be prepared for whatever is coming next.
Yeah.
And so I think that makes a lot of sense for grief to clear out, because every ending is going to bring up a lot of energy, a lot of emotion. The emotions don't even have to all make sense.
No.
Often it's a whole big jumble of stuff. And you're right. Some way, somehow, that has to get out of your system.
And grief is just the most efficient way to do it.
It is.
I really
It
think
is.
it's almost like a knee-jerk, intuitive, instinctual reaction to transition. And so that's why I was saying I don't think it necessarily has to be about your feelings about something ending, because sometimes you're thrilled it's ending and you don't understand why you're having such grief.
Right.
It's because the grief is helping you to move on and to process and to let go. I was one of the reasons I wanted to bring this up was because I had an email conversation with one of my clients who was saying, I really don't get why I'm so literally on the floor crying right now. I made this decision that I'm super happy about, and I'm really looking forward to this next phase of my life. And yet here I am on the floor sobbing about it.
Yeah.
And she said I had to like pause and think about why I feel this way, or what is it that I'm letting go of, or what is it that I'm allowing to move through me and out of me. And she said, and I think this is so, so true, and I totally am feeling this way as well, that there's a difference between where she thought she would be when she started that phase and where she is when she's ending it.
Oh my gosh.
And in a
yes.
lot of ways, she's better off. But there's still a grief in that younger version of yourself not getting what they wanted and having to sort of reconcile where you are with where you thought you would be is I think that's a huge part of transitions in general, but it's what a lot of the grief is about, is just getting out those expectations and wringing out those hopes that you may have had, or just the visual that the visualizations that you had that didn't exactly turn out the way you thought.
Right. You have to part with the vision that you had of your life of at 30, right? Or after I moved, or whatever I was projecting out into the future in the form of some vision or some, like you said, form of expectations. If that doesn't come to pass the way I expected it to, maybe it even was better. Maybe it was just completely different. Maybe it fell short. It doesn't really matter how it's different, but that vision is no longer possible. And so you have to part with that.
And it
the
hurts.
vision.
It's kind of
It's like saying goodbye to something that you really thought you wanted. That's hard.
Not even that. I mean, yes, that. But I think it can also be, because I think this is what she was getting at too, is that it's also looking back and saying, oh my gosh, what is that girl in for? I feel for what my former self had to go through to get to this point.
And unconsciously, you can't help but then think, what about my current self and what she doesn't even know yet? Because if I can look back and think how naive that younger version of me was, then some version of me 10 years from now is looking back saying, this girl has no idea what she's in for. And you know that on some level, and it's scary.
Yeah, right. So you're right. You're looking behind you and you're feeling a lot of emotion and and not overwhelm anymore, but you're feeling just a lot of feelings about
nostalgia and sadness
and happiness and all of it. And then you're also looking forward at this blank unknown, which is terribly scary. So of course you're collapsing on the floor. I mean, you're kind of between these two very polar opposite things, but both equally emotionally fraught. And you need grief in order to process it and clear out space. That is what grief does. It clears out space. It is a cleansing agent. So
when you try to stifle that grief, you're really doing yourself a disservice.
Keeping yourself stuck, maybe, in old emotions, and you're not letting yourself process and move on.
And you might not be adequately preparing yourself for what's coming next because there's stuff clogged up in the pipes that you really need to get out so that you're fully ready and available and prepared for whatever's coming next.
And I understand it is a very human compulsion to want to understand why you are grieving. And I think it's okay to try. But I also want to assure you that you don't have to understand it. And that honestly, whatever you think you understand is probably only a fraction of what you're really grieving and what you're really letting go of on an emotional level. You just have no idea. And you might, in hindsight, one day see, oh, that's why I was so upset, or that's what I was letting go of. And then you might never. And that's honestly, it's not the point. You don't need to know why you're having such intense feelings. The point is to just let it out and let it flow.
What I also do not want you to do is judge however you are feeling, because I've had a lot of clients who, for example, I had a client who was getting married. This was a little while back. And while obviously she was so excited, there was a part of her that was a little bit sad.
Oh, completely. Yes. I've talked to married people, newly married people like this.
The whole phase of her life that was ending for good, hopefully. And she wanted it to end, but she felt really guilty for feeling sad leading up to her wedding day. Like, I'm not supposed to feel like this. I'm supposed to be this glowing, beautiful, beaming, happy bride. And I feel so conflicted. And so I want to give you permission right now that any feeling that you are feeling in the middle of a transition is normal.
And it doesn't
literally
have to,
any feeling.
You don't have to try to make it make logical sense.
No.
And one of the worst things you can do is sit there and be like, this doesn't make sense. Why do I feel like this?
I shouldn't be feeling like this. If I were
a better person, I wouldn't feel like this.
Exactly.
This reminds me of what our great friend Joanna Platt, who we had an absolutely awesome conversation with about emotional constipation back in April. No, it was May, I think. But if you go back to April or May of 2018, you'll see emotional constipation. It's our second most popular episode ever, or maybe third. It's in the top 3. It's an incredible episode.
Yes.
And in that, she talks about the fact that her sister's wedding brought up so much grief for her. And that she cried the entire plane ride back from the Bahamas to DC. Like 6 hours.
Through airports.
Through 2 airports. She said she just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. And it wasn't because...
She wasn't not happy for her sister.
Yeah, she was thrilled for her sister. She was like overjoyed for her sister. And that was part of it, I think. But really, what she said, it was the end of a phase for our family, and it was the beginning of a new phase.
Yep.
And she said, I don't need to know why, really, I was feeling it. I just know that what I was doing is I was processing and letting go of this phase that was over.
She just cleansed for 6 hours straight or something like that. And that's what she needed.
Yeah.
So you don't have to understand it. I really, really don't want you to judge it, because if you're feeling it, I guarantee you other people have felt this way too. That's the hardest thing. Is
how are you a human and not have felt grief?
But in those moments, we can feel like, well, other brides-to-be don't feel like this, I'm sure. Or other people who turn 30 probably aren't having this strong of a reaction.
Yeah.
And so when you think that you're having a weird or different or overblown...
the wrong reaction.
Exactly. Reaction, then you'll be more likely to judge yourself. And I want to tell you, if you're feeling it, I guarantee you hundreds, thousands, millions of people have felt that exact same way in a very similar situation, because transitions bring up everything. They bring up all the stuck stuff inside of you to get it out. And so whatever you're feeling is okay and normal.
So
don't fight it.
However, or in addition to, it's probably a better way to say it. You can use the grief of transitions and the clearing out. Really, I mean, it makes me think of the fact that, forest fires, as awful as they are, to a degree. I mean, I think we've made them worse, what with our, abuse of the environment and climate change and all of that. However, naturally occurring forest fires are cleansing. They literally create space for new life to grow. And it is part of the cyclical nature of a forest that it burns down every once in a while. Grief is your burning down process. That's it.
Yep.
So, however, there are things that you can do and ways that you can approach this that enable you to grow that new life, so to speak, and ease your way into the next phase of your life. It doesn't have to be for nothing, is the point. So one of the best approaches or explanations I've heard is something that Glennon Doyle wrote about in Love Warrior. And she says that the word chaos, which is something that grief makes you feel, it throws you into a state of chaos.
And transitions all in and of themselves feel chaotic.
Very much so. I can't remember which language she said. It's either Greek, Latin, or Hebrew. So an ancient religion. The root word for chaos, it means to sift.
Ooh, I like that.
What it means is that chaos, when it comes into your life, it throws everything up in the air, and it lets you sift through what matters and what doesn't matter, and reprioritize and re-question how you want your life to be and what you want it to look like and what you value. That is what a transition can do for you. It can blow through your life and change everything and make you question things you need to question and make you change things you need to change.
That is so true. I have a client right now who feels very much in transition. And part of that has to do with some family health stuff that's going on that's really scary, that's thrown a lot of questions into the mix. And up until that point, she wasn't really sure what she wanted to do. She was dabbling in this. She was playing around with this idea. And even though this transition threw her life into so much chaos and brought up some really scary stuff, she said, within about a week, I had my priorities so solid.
Exactly.
So clear.
Yeah.
I was like, this is what I need to spend my time on. This doesn't really matter anymore. Things fell away so easily without a lot of angst, because grief has this way of sharpening your priorities like nothing else. Mm-hmm. And even though I wouldn't wish that kind of chaos or grief on anyone purposely, because it's scary and it hurts a lot. But again, it can really, really help you, because oftentimes our lives get cluttered up with a lot of stuff.
And we get into a neutral state.
Yes.
A sort of, everything's fine. It's not
like
great.
Emotional hoarding. You have a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
It's kind of that, like, you're tolerating and you're kind of a little bit stagnant, but it's okay. And so there's no point in rocking the boat.
Yep.
Grief and transitions often flip your boat over. And then there you are. You done been dunked in the water. And you're very quickly like, oh,
what do I need? What's
I
important?
need my life I need my life preserver. And do I really need those snacks that are falling to the bottom of the lake? And are those sunglasses really important? And what matters here? Oh, the dog. I should probably get the dog and put that back in the boat. Right? It forces you to be a lot more clear about what your priorities are. And okay, not every transition is going to throw you into that level of chaos. Obviously, a health crisis will do that for you. But not every transition is a crisis.
No, that's true.
However, there are transitions that I mean, I think every transition forces you to ask questions like that. There are some that are more obvious than others, like graduating college. You graduate college, and it's natural for people to go, what next? Who do I really want to be? What do I really want out of life? But there are birthdays that can do that for you. And to be honest, sometimes we can kind of have low-grade transition, almost like a low-grade fever, because we don't know how to answer those questions. And sometimes we can ignore them until a big life event happens that makes us pay attention, which is why I have had an undue number of people contacting us for coaching this year who are 29 going on 30.
Yes.
Why? Because they're staring down the barrel of a big transition, and all of a sudden it's harder to ignore.
Yep.
I think it's not that transitions cause you to ask totally different questions, is that it brings to the surface things that you might have been able to ignore easier before.
This is also why we often get a big influx of people reaching out to us right before the new year.
January.
Because the new year is a big transition that we all share.
Yeah.
And it can feel like it's throwing the past year or the past several years into stark contrast. Do you want to repeat this?
Yeah.
And so there's some that are going to be more personal transitions, but there's some that we all tend to go through together. And you will see patterns of behavior that are people scrambling to figure things out and scrambling to quote unquote improve themselves or whatever, because they're trying to refigure out those priorities.
So there's a question I want you to ask me based on this, but now I have to ask myself because you can't read my mind.
No, I mean,
but I want you to ask me.
I can sometimes read your mind, but not on
like
cue.
this. Yeah, not live. Okay, the question I would have liked for you to ask me from a coaching perspective is, how is this transition you're going through causing you to ask questions or reprioritize your own life? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Good question. What's your answer?
Oh, no. It's hard because I had the question. I don't necessarily have the answer.
Well, you
ready.
might still be figuring that out. You might still be in the prioritization phase. So it's okay if you don't know all the answers, but does anything come to mind?
I think that it's making me really want to get my financial life even more in check. Obviously, I'm not financially irresponsible in any way, and I don't overspend. There's plenty of things that I'm good at, but I would like to be... I just feel like now that I'm 30, I think it's important for me to pay even more attention and be even more mindful of where my money is going and how smart I'm being with it and investing and things like that. So that's a practical thing that I've been called to do. And I literally just started this new budgeting app that our friend Joanna was teaching me how to use. And so there's one practical sort of reprioritization. Okay. But personally, I think what's happening is that I'm just getting to I think a lot of the grief that I'm experiencing about turning 30 has to do with just creating space. Because again, I have this whole decade in front of me that I don't really know what it's going to look like. And I've spent a lot of my 20s doing things that I'm glad I did. I focused on my health. I really
built a business.
I built a business and I got financially stable and I acquired so much wisdom and I spiritually grew and evolved and let go of anxiety. I mean, there's just
grew a lot of really great friendships.
Yeah, there's a tool we learn in coach training. It's called the Wheel of Life. And if you just you just imagine literally like a wheel, like a wagon wheel, not a car wheel.
I think it's 8 or 10
with the spokes, right? So it looks like a pie chart. And it's an interesting tool because what you do is you take different colored pencils and you fill in from the base of the wheel where the spokes meet outward. You kind of color in up to the point where you feel you are satisfied.
It's like a ranking exercise, I think, 1 to 10 kind of an
and so 10 would be
on how
full,
satisfied you are in each area of your life.
Yeah, so 10 would be like a full pie chart, totally colored in, and an 8 would be mostly colored in, and a 1 would be only a teeny little bit of color there at the bottom or the base. And so I think I've been thinking a lot about my wheel of life. Mm-hmm. And I've been thinking about what belongs there. And I've been thinking about how I think turning 30 there's something about a transition that just clears out a lot of space. And what I'm grateful for is that I've already done a lot of those things it's not, you don't have to keep doing health, quote unquote, you do. But I've done a lot of the healing and the sort of foundational, really manual labor, sort of heavy lifting work. I already did that.
Right.
So I don't have to do as much of that now, and I'm creating space for things that I want to happen in this decade, such as getting married and having kids and things like that. So I don't know where that's going, and obviously that's not going to happen tomorrow, but I think that a lot of my grief has been actually just a space clearing exercise in preparation for where I feel like I'm going next. But I don't know. how to answer that. I know I asked the question, but I'm still trying to figure out how to answer that question.
I think it's maybe more important that you pose the question in general, because that's a good question to be asking yourself if you're in a transition, because that's part of the purpose of being in transition is closing a chapter, feeling however you need to feel about it, reprioritizing, and then opening up space for the next phase. And I think that's a really hard, I wanted to talk about the space in between.
Oh my gosh, the space between is the hardest thing to be in your entire life.
It's so hard. And this is something that most of us are really bad at.
I have a blog about this.
Keeping the space open.
Should link to that.
Yes, you should. And this is one of the things, we'll link to a couple of blogs because I wrote about transitions a while back. And that was one of the things that I suggested that you do. And it's probably the hardest thing I suggested in that whole blog is when you are closing a chapter and you know something else is coming, maybe you even know what it is.
But you don't know when, maybe.
You don't know when, or you don't know what it's going to be like. So maybe you are getting married, right? You know
I
you're
don't know how, but I know something's starting right now. Watch and you'll see. Okay, I'll stop.
That's a very Rachel move. I love it.
So start singing Little Mermaid in the middle of a podcast?
Totally. Yeah. And so maybe you even know, maybe you are getting married, or maybe you're getting a new job, or you're moving and you know what's coming next, but you don't really know, because until you're in it, you don't really know what to expect. And there's this period of time where you're either about to transition into the new thing, or you're waiting for the new thing because you don't know exactly when it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And what most of us want to do is rush in and fill that space.
So because super uncomfortable.
So uncomfortable.
We don't like the sitting in the discomfort of something. It's so difficult. Again, really, you should go listen to that episode with Joanna, because we talk about the necessity of doing what we call emotional planks.
Yes.
And that's what it is. It's holding this really uncomfortable position because you know it's going to make you stronger and you know it's going to help you grow. And that's really what a transition does. It opens up that space for you to grow. But if you rush to fill it, you might be stealing your own growth opportunity. It's sort of like cheating during your plank. You're not really helping yourself, even though it feels better in the moment.
Right.
I mean, I cheat in planks all the time in yoga. So, I mean, I have a lot to learn too. I'm actually better at emotional planks than real planks.
I think it's helpful to remember in those periods of time in the in-between that it will end. And what you're going to be tempted to do is end it prematurely. You're going to want to fill that space. You're going to want to jump right into the next thing. You're going to want to make yourself really busy because you're afraid you're going to get stuck there. And it's so uncomfortable and you have no idea what's coming. So you want to control something. But if you can remember, this will come to an end. Mm-hmm. I don't have to end it. In fact, if I let it come to its natural end and smoothly move into the next thing, it's going to be a whole lot better all around because I'm going to be available to whatever comes next instead of being so busy and distracted because I didn't like this discomfort. And you're also going to be able to really move into that next phase with, you're going to have processed whatever you needed to process. You're going to have cleansed whatever you needed to cleanse. Yeah. But that takes a little bit of time. And it's that weird kind of pillowy, uncertain in-between time. And I don't know how long it's going to last. That's the hardest part. It will end, but you don't know when exactly. And so it's going to require strength and patience and those emotional planks. Yes, and a lot of faith to be in it and not fill up that time and space purely out of discomfort.
I mean, really, that's when you're under high heat and pressure, that's when you transform, literally, like on a chemical level. That is when things break down and retransform it. They transform into something else. So I think that we often want to jump out of the oven just when we would have been cooked, or just when we would have changed our chemical structure. And I think that's what's happening during a transition is you're just being put into sort of a pressure cooker.
Yeah.
So, okay, but you can make it through that. Here's what's going to happen. Here's why transitions are often awesome and why we need them. They're a slingshot effect. Like I said earlier, a lot of the time, we're just sort of like bumping along in life. We're kind of coasting.
Yep.
Things are okay. They're not great. When someone asks you about your job, you're like, I don't hate it. But you're not really excited. You're not really enthused. You're not depressed or devastated either. But you're just sort of in this beige place. That's a more dangerous place to be than maybe anywhere else because it's so easy to coast for years. Just go on autopilot and stay there. Transitions often come in and shake things up. And what happens is it's like you imagine a slingshot, but when the band is just sort of at neutral, that's when you're coasting.
Yep.
A transition picks that band up and pulls it back. And so it feels like you've backslid, like you've made, like you've somehow de-evolved and made even less progress somehow. But what's happening is that there is now literally sort of energetic potential built up.
But it's also tension because you're pulling it back
and pressure.
And the tension feels like
difficult.
Very uncomfortable.
Very uncomfortable. But eventually it gets let go. And then you zoom forward with all of that energetic potential you'd built up. So
it propels you so much faster and so much further than you could have gotten from that place of complacency.
Yes.
And so it serves a purpose in building a lot of momentum in a very short amount of time.
Right.
And I'll tell you, most people are very afraid of stagnation. They're afraid of having a humdrum.
And yet so many
life.
people are doing it.
Right. And so I think it's funny that we don't like feeling stagnant, but then we also don't like transitions because they feel uncomfortable. But in order to not live a stagnant, complacent life, you're going to have to go through transitions. And so if you can remember, this is preventing me from feeling numb and kind of robotic.
It's also setting me up for to get what I want.
Exactly.
And I just have to go through the discomfort of being basically pulled back in the slingshot.
Yes. Then hopefully that can help you reframe the purpose of the transition. So it's not just an uncomfortable, scary.
That feels like shit for no reason.
Right. It does have a purpose. It is moving you forward. It's going to propel you so much further than you could have gotten before. And it's preventing you from the stagnation that all of us at our core are afraid of. We are meant to change and evolve. And transitions are the vehicle that allow you to do that. So they serve a really powerful purpose. But you don't have to like them. That's
You
okay.
don't have to like it. Of course you don't have to like feeling like garbage or feeling these absolute racking sobs of grief that are just flowing through you. And let me just tell you, you're not going to just, during some transitions, you're not just going to have grief once. You're going to have, maybe like Joanna said, she got most of her grief out on that one plane ride. I'm not sure that was the end of her grief, but she sort of peaked. That was the peak of her grief. Depending on the nature of the transition, you are going to have a lot of those moments of just getting it out and getting it out. But it's like having a bad case of food poisoning.
Yes.
At first, you're throwing up like every 30 minutes. I'm sorry to gross you out, but I got to just be real about it. And then there's that half-life effect that happens where then it's an hour and then it's 2 and then it's 4 and then it's 8 and then you don't throw up anymore.
Yeah.
I think that grief comes out of you in the same way. At first, it's often, and then there's going to be a little bit more, a little bit more, and a little bit more until you make it through the transition.
Yeah, it's like emotional aftershocks. You have to have the earthquake of the feeling.
Yeah.
And I'll say if you allow the earthquake of the feeling to happen unfiltered and without trying to stamp it down or block it, you can get a lot of it out then. But don't expect to get out of having any kind of emotional aftershocks. Things are going to remind you of that transition and you might get triggered. Or you might just have a moment that seems like completely out of the blue. You just have this wave of emotion.
Yeah.
That's normal. It's not a one and done kind of a situation.
Nothing is. Like literally nothing is.
No.
Except, I can't even think of an idea. So one last thing I want to say, because speaking of Joanna, I told her we were going to talk about this. And I asked if she had anything that she would have added. And we started talking about what's the difference between grief and depression. And we both agreed, you can disagree or not with this, not just you, Kristen, but everyone listening to this. But we thought it made sense that grief is a lot of energy in motion. It's waves. It's like a river that's literally just pushing itself through you, and it's hard to stop it from happening, and it is just coming up and out, and you got to let it out. Depression is more of a numbing device.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking when you...
It's a blanket that's just it's just muffling everything. It's like this gray cloud that comes over you and you don't really feel anything.
Yes, depression is often the absence
of feeling,
emotion.
Yeah.
And that's what's so scary about it, because I think a lot of people, if they just think about it briefly, they might assume depression equals sadness, but often you don't even feel sad. You just feel numb.
Yeah.
And grief is all of the feelings compacted in a very small space about to explode out of you.
Yeah.
There's just so much going on there. And so I think while, the thesaurus might have them as synonyms or something close, they feel very different.
Well, the reason I wanted to bring that up here and with her was because I think it's tempting when you feel the grief of a transition to wonder, am I depressed?
Yeah, sure, of course.
And I mean, I think
That's
we can
not
split
normal.
hairs about what the definition of situational depression is. I think major depression is very different than grief. I think we can go through periods of life where we are in a situational depression where that might actually be more grief than because it ends.
That's
right. You get broken up with and you are in a stage of depression for a few months. But really what you're experiencing is grief because it does flow out of you and you do heal. And 3 months later, you're not depressed anymore.
Right. Grief is a wave. It flows up and then it flows out.
A series of waves.
A series of waves, right. But there is this
There's a beginning and a middle and an end, usually.
But because there's so much emotion, it's flowing out. It has to. It's too much to get
There's nowhere
trapped
else
in.
to go.
But depression is something that you could get stuck in
for years.
For longer, especially there's so many factors that go into that we're not going to try to talk about here.
No.
But
one day we will have a side chat or something about...
That can be chronic.
Yeah, about depression. Just
I think
in and of itself.
Grief, if not expressed and if not...
turns into depression.
Can turn into chronic depression. Absolutely.
Well, right. We, again, with this episode is clearly the cousin of our episode with Joanna because we talked about that in that episode too, that unexpressed emotion that has nowhere else to go has to go somewhere. And it turns inward and it can become illness, chronic illness, and it can become depression and other, anxiety and other things that often people end up getting medicated for. So allow it to flow out of you. I know it's so uncomfortable and I don't like it. How many times have I told you, okay, I'm so dramatic, but how many times have I told you in the past couple weeks that I think I'm depressed? It's been a few times, right?
That's true.
And the thing is that it actually hasn't been consistent.
And you are in the middle of a transition.
So maybe I should stop. I know, but that's the thing is even I, in the middle of it, lose my perspective, which is why I want other people to hear this. And I want to reassure people that if you are in a transition or you are experiencing that level of sort of grief and you let it out, let it process. Don't try to understand it too hard in the middle of it. When the wave has passed is the better time. Even if you know another wave is coming, there is a calm in between waves. Usually that's the better time to try to ask yourself the questions and get clear on, if you want to get clear on why it's happening. Don't try to do it in the very middle of your deepest, darkest hole. And when the wave is crested over your head, don't do that.
No, that doesn't serve anybody.
Be kind to yourself. This is going to end. It's clearing out space. It's either flushing out if you like water analogies or it's burning away if you like fire analogies. An old phase of your life, and it's creating space so that a new and better version of yourself can rise up out of it. And it's
be prepared for something that might be so much better on the other side, even if you can't see it now.
Yeah. So, okay, we could go on and on, but I hope that will plant some seeds with you and help you, even if you're not in a major transition right now. I hope that at least the next time you have something like this happen, you will keep this in mind.
Yes. Or if you know someone who's in a transition, either
share this with
them, or just more than anything, help normalize how they're feeling. That's the very best thing you can do for someone who's in a challenging transition right now, is allow them to feel however they feel with no judgment and normalize that whatever experiencing you're having is okay and it will end. We know a lot of you guys are going through some big transitions. We hope this was helpful. And like I said at the beginning, come leave us a comment where this episode lives on our website and share what transition you're going through. Maybe the pandemic has thrown you into transition, or maybe you were already in one and this has just exacerbated things. But anyway, come share. And as a reminder, you can get the Passion Profile short course for half off. Until June at some point. We'll let you know more specifics, but that is something that is a really good place to start if you're in transition, especially a career transition and you're trying to figure out what to do next.
Yeah.
then that is going to jumpstart you into whatever comes next for you.
If you want to know for sure whether or not it's like a good place for you to start, just go to the episode notes, click on over to the PPSC page, and you can read about it and see what the deal is. So we will be back on Tuesday with a new Message from the Universe episode.
We'll also be back on Friday.
Wait. I thought it was Friday.
It's been a long day.
Well, we will
be back on Friday.
That was accurate that I said that next Tuesday there will be another Message from the Universe.
That is accurate.
But it's more accurate to say that we'll be back on Friday with a new Dear Rachel.
Yeah, and we've got some good questions about some are pandemic related and some are not. But they're all very current.
Well, it doesn't even matter that they're pandemic related because what's being brought up is universal. It's not just...
It's always deeper. It's just bringing out deeper things that were already there.
Yeah, that is what a crisis is good for, is bringing crap up to the surface so that you can address it and heal it and move on, hopefully.
So we're going to do that a little bit on Friday.
Okay, well, see you on Friday then. Bye.